This episode of the Media Leader podcast was edited by our production partner, Trisonic, a results-focused agency that plans and buys all audio media. Check them out at trisonic.co.uk. That's trisonic.co.uk.
We believe that fact-checked original content is a really critical part of this AI growth, and we really need to make sure that there is a model to sustain that.
Welcome to the Media Leader podcast. I'm Jack Benjamin. AI seems to constantly be on everyone's minds in the media industry, and this is especially true for creatives concerned about AI companies infringing upon their copyrighted material to train their large language models. In December, the UK government launched a consultation on how it should handle regulation of AI companies seeking to access digital publishers' IP. The consultation wrapped at the end of February, and the publishing industry, as well as the wider creative industries, used that time to push back strongly against AI companies, arguing that offering them leniency around copyright would severely undermine existing business models for publishers and artists. One industry leader at the forefront of the fight to protect publishers' IP is Sajeeda Merali. Sajeeda is CEO of the Professional Publishers Association, a trade body representing specialist publishers. I spoke with Sajeeda about this ongoing debate. She laid out the arguments being made by AI companies, by publishers, and what the government is currently considering as it weighs the desire to drive technological and economic growth in the UK while also protecting its outsized creative industry from harm. We also discussed how magazines are adapting to new business realities, such as those created by consumer shifts toward AI usage and away from print readership, by transitioning to multi-platform content and commercial strategies. This is that conversation. I hope you enjoy. Sajeeda Merali, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I like to start these interviews by asking what drew you to the media industry in the first place, and also publishing within it. And as an addendum, why you've stuck with publishing.
Yeah.
Even after so much change and transition that the channel has sort of experienced over the past, 20, 30 years.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I kind of fell into publishing, if I'm completely honest, like most people. I started selling recruitment advertising on V&U way back over 25 years ago, but we won't tell anyone that. And I just worked my way up the commercial ladder. Spent a lot of my career at Incisive Media in their insurance division. I then went to Euromoney for a few years, and the job before this one, I was CRO for New Statesman Media Group. And now I get to rep the industry that I grew up in. So that's been my journey in a nutshell. But like I said, I fell into it. I mean, when I was at school or uni, I had no idea that this was a job or a career that you could excel in. And I think as an industry, we probably need to do a much better job at promoting it, at promoting the variety of roles we now have, the careers that people can have within the sector as well. And I suppose that's one of the reasons that we launched the Find Yourself in Publishing campaign. So that was an initiative led by the Next Gen board that we have. And it features real life stories from those working in the sector, how they got there, tips on how to sort of, link to current jobs, how to write a good CV, suggest roles. So we're trying to do our bit to, to gain more awareness of the industry.
Do you think that publishing needs that little bit of kick, not only to make people aware that jobs are available for people, especially young graduates or non-graduates?
Yeah.
Or is it sufficiently, sexy to younger professionals?
Yeah, I mean, one of your questions at the beginning was, why have I stuck with it, right? Yeah. And I think the reason that I still find myself here is because the job is so vastly different to what it was when I first started, right? We had like obviously the introduction of the internet, smartphones, social media. We've had to adapt as an industry. And as a result of that, there are so many roles that you don't automatically think of publishing, right? So journalism and sales, okay, that's a bit more obvious. But, we need data analysts, we need audio specialists, we need video producers. So I think that's the bit where we need to create more awareness about, is that it's not just a role for people in journalism, but it goes much more broader than that.
You mentioned the need to adapt over time. I think maybe the big topic that publishing is needing to adapt to is AI. And I know you've spoken a great deal about this in public. lobbying government. You were in the House of Commons just a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
There's a lot of tension going on between essentially the creative industries, which obviously publishing is included in, and also the AI companies.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to ask you about sort of the intellectual property rights issue as it stands. So in the UK, as well as in other markets, governments are currently deciding whether to allow these big AI companies to access publisher material to train their large language models on.
Yeah.
I'm curious, in terms of access to that IP, what is the argument that the AI companies are making? And then I'll ask you what your response is.
Okay. All right. Well, before I go into that, I'm just going to start at the beginning, right? So, as you said, this is all about protecting IP and copyright. And the fundamental principles of copyright is that it grants the copyright holder the rights, and it tries to move the burden of respecting those rights to people who are seeking to reuse that information. And so the argument being made by the tech platforms, they're pushing government to allow their AI models to train on copyrighted material. They're arguing that fair use exemption applies and that there is a need to ensure growth of the AI economy, and that would be a part of that. And that there is an idea that they are sort of leaning into, which is a right to learn by machines, which is, of course, a made-up idea. So they're supportive for deregulation and are suggesting that the UK must follow US, Japan, other jurisdictions to stay competitive in this AI revolution.
And you mentioned fair use argument. I know what that is. I'm not sure everyone knows exactly the legal theory around what is and is not fair use.
Yeah.
What do you make of that argument?
So my understanding of fair use is that, you can take a section of somebody's IP content and use that for another use, right? So it might be you refer to something in a research paper, or you might quote somebody in an article. What it doesn't mean is that you can literally verbatim copy lots and lots of content that belongs to publishers to turn that into, to train a model that is actually a commercial competitor. So, it's quite laughable, actually, that that's being used.
So I guess tell me other parts of the PPA's position.
Yeah.
So the AI big tech companies, they're arguing one thing. What's been the PPA's position?
So the creative sector, of which the publishing sector is part of, PPA is part of, is challenging this overall assumption. So we believe that fact-checked original content is a really critical part of this AI growth. And we really need to make sure that there is a model to sustain that. We believe that deregulation is not the only viable path forward. And what we're doing is asking government to consider how a balanced regulatory approach could actually provide the UK with that competitive edge that they're looking for. And there's quite a few parts to that argument, actually, right? So I know you mentioned the US as well, but, if we're looking at the competitive global landscape and AI, the US is not settled, right? There are over 30 widely known court cases and more coming out continuously where we're seeing cases ruling in favour of the rights holders. There's Thomson Reuters, Ross Intelligence one, which is sort of widely known as well, but there's many, many. And our members that operate in the US and the UK, they certainly don't see the US as a sort of a deregulated market. And having a fair regulatory backdrop, that doesn't mean that international companies will not choose to build and invest in the UK. There are many, many reasons why international companies will choose to invest in the UK, and actually the government can really influence that, right? So they issued the Clifford report recently that was signed off by Keir Starmer. If you haven't read it, and for your listeners, it refers to the AI Opportunities Action Plan. It outlines about 50 recommendations for the government to grow the UK's AI sector and drive AI adoption across the economy. And it's a pretty bold commitment. And it also refers to how government provides power, special economic zones, access to universities. So there is a lot that the government can do around tax breaks, incentives to help people build domestically. And then the other two parts of this argument is that the UK proportionately has a bigger creative sector than any other country. And so it has much more to defend and also much more to lose by abandoning the sort of the copyright protections. But ultimately, it's about balancing human creativity and emerging tech, and the two do need to go hand in hand. It's not the case that protecting rights holders it's not about choosing creatives over AI. It's literally ensuring that the creative sector can still exist.
And there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
I think the AI companies would potentially argue, well, if you can't give us the exemptions that we need for our products to work and work at a high level and in the way that we want them to, then actually we can invest elsewhere, because we can hopefully find some other government somewhere in the world that will allow us to build and do what we want to do with IP. And you mentioned that it's not settled in the US, but certainly the regulatory environment in the US, I think you would probably admit, has changed or is changing under the new Trump administration. So does the argument stand up that you actually can have both protection for the creative industry and also not allow these AI companies to sort of bully the rest of the government or other industries that it wants to sort of use?
Yes, I think there's obviously the recent DeepSeek example, which shows that new models can be built on much smaller data sets and much more quickly. So I think there are also countries around the world that are really thinking about this. I spoke to somebody recently that was using South Korea as an example, where actually they've taken the decision to sort of build their own models and have a sort of slightly different agreement with platforms like Google. You're right that the US isn't it's not settled. I think also we need to think about where's the money going. So the billions of pounds of advertising that's being generated through some of these platforms already, it is ending up US companies are creating revenue to build back into the US. It's not actually ending up in the UK's economy. So I think there is some analysis to do around actually where's the money actually going.
I think it's a very good point. These big international companies are coming into Europe, the UK, and sort of wanting to say, well, we want your customers in this market to access what we've built under a slightly different regulatory environment, potentially in the US. I guess the question for the government is whether or not Europe, as in general, will want to develop more homegrown products as opposed to just allowing the big tech companies that currently exist to sort of run roughshod over the country.
Yeah, and I think the Clifford report definitely talks about building domestically and kind of what the idea of building. I think they want to be the third biggest AI economy.
That really takes decades in order to really build up. So we're talking like pretty long term here. It's
a bold statement.
Yeah.
But look, where's the government presently sitting on this? You mentioned I was honoured to sort of represent the industry at the House of Commons recently. So just to roll back, there was a consultation that was published in December, and that closed on the 25th of Feb last month.
There was a big ad campaign around it. All the newspaper. This is the first time I think I've seen this.
Yeah,
I don't know
absolutely.
if it's the first time ever.
Absolutely.
That all the newspaper publishers ran the same ad. I think it was "Make It Fair" was the copy.
That's right. I mean, it's the first time that all the newspapers have had the same front cover. So many of our members got involved by promoting the campaign. The music industry did. It was a big thing at the Brits. Even Elton John got involved with some postings. So, obviously keeping the pressure up on this is important. But they've had something like 11,000 responses to the consultation, which is way more than normal. And then what's also happened recently, last week, James Frith, who is part of the Culture Committee, brilliant MP, he brought together a small delegation of creative leaders to meet with the Secretary of State, Peter Kyle. So it's great to get that dialogue started, and we're hoping that can be the start of ensuring, that we are able to feed into that sort of wider conversation. But you're right, the Fair Use campaign, it's really plain to see that this topic on protecting copyright, we've been talking about it for some time, but it's supported right across the creative sector. It's not just, high profile musicians, magazines, news, etc., but also lots of people in Parliament talking about it as well. So, Baroness Kidron did an excellent speech earlier in the year. There was an article in the Times by Kemi Badenoch on this issue where she actually referred to the government's proposals as a mess that will come at the expense of the creative industries.
Well, she would say that. I mean, she's not running government.
But even, Tim Flagg, chief exec of the trade body UKAI, was quoted in the Times a few weeks back saying the opt-out model, which is the option in the consultation that government are favouring, would significantly harm the creative sectors to achieve minimal gain for a handful of global tech companies. So that's somebody that's running the trade body for the AI, the AI trade body. So overwhelming understanding, I think, that original creative copyright holders' content add to the overall growth of this AI economy.
And you mentioned the government, you said it's currently favoring this opt-out model.
Yeah.
And just to explain what that is, that's essentially saying that a publisher has to go to the AI company and say, we do not want you to take our IP and copyright and use it. And then the AI company can respond and say, okay, fine, as opposed to enforcing copyright laws as they currently exist, which would require more of an opt-in, actually.
Absolutely right. So in the consultation, there were 4 options, right? One of them was option 0. So the government didn't take that option seriously at all. They didn't even give it a number. Okay. But then you've got, option 1 was the opt-in option, if you like. So that favoured the creators and it would allow for quite a dynamic licensing market. That's the one that we've gone for. There was another option which was sort of broad exception and it removed copyright entirely. And the opt-out option, that was sort of a narrow exception. So it removes the rights, but the creators have the option to opt out and reserve their rights, right? And that was when the consultation came through, the government put that down as a preferred option.
And are they still there? Are they still preferring that option?
Well, we don't know, right? They need to obviously look through the responses and sort of come back on that. But it's interesting. We heard from a tech company that works with many of our publishers recently, and they did some analysis on PPA members. And for those that had opted out of Perplexity, I think it was something like over 85% was still showing up. So opt-out isn't a solution because it's not working.
It's not being enforced in any way.
Not exactly that enforcement,
So that seems like a potentially huge blind spot. What does enforcement look like of a sort of opt-out contract as opposed to you had copyright laws on the books and we're just choosing not to apply them in this situation?
Yeah.
What's at stake here for especially members of the PPA? How important is copyright protection for these brands?
It's really important, right? It's the bedrock of what we all do, what Media Leader does, right? So let me just explain a little bit more for your listeners who might not know exactly who our members are. So we've got quite a broad church of members, so large multinational publishers, and that includes household names like, Good Housekeeping, Good Food, British Vogue, The Week, New Scientist, etc. And then we have business media, and that's very much for, the B2B space, decision makers who are relying daily on their insights about their trade, about their sector. They're leading some of the biggest industries shaping our world today. But it also includes brands that have people on the front line, right? So people on the ground that need information to do their jobs. So Nursing Times, Farmers Weekly, for example. And then we also have independent publishers from SMEs all the way to entrepreneurs. It includes brands speaking to really diverse audiences as well. So Black business, inclusive design. So real diverse mix of publishers. But what binds them all together is that they're creating trusted editorial for the communities they serve, right? It's all about that media held to a higher standard, but that actually costs money to produce. It's not free. And in the digital economy, that investment currently comes largely through advertising. And, many of our members tell us that the majority of their traffic comes from Google search. And people that have been relying on search from day to day are increasingly turning to large language models to find the information that they want. And then I saw the article that you did on AI overviews as well. That's also a potential impact, right?
Yeah, I was going to ask about that, actually.
Yeah, so much of this information has been trained on publishers' content without permission, without the right permissions. So I suppose if companies can, or if people can access this information through other means, why would they subscribe, right? But also, if there's no longer a need to access the publisher's website, there's going to be that loss of traffic, therefore loss of ad revenue, right?
And have publishers already seen, generally speaking, obviously for any individual publisher might be very different, but with AI overviews or using ChatGPT for have publishers seen a decline in referral traffic from search since AI overviews was introduced last August into the UK?
Yes, it's very difficult to say, because the other thing that's obviously part of the conversation is irregular algorithm changes and things like that. Right. So it's difficult to say exactly what's impacting that traffic decline. And there is actually some work. We have an SEO steering group that is doing some benchmarking on that. So the businesses are coming together to benchmark how they're being impacted. So that there should be some better information on that shortly. But, ultimately what we need is a new revenue stream in the form of licensing. And, that will ensure that there is that investment back into that creative content.
That strikes me as a huge challenge. Even if you were to get a licensing agreement, how do you actually value accurately the amount of value that you're giving to an AI company? Because it strikes me that if you're talking about potentially reducing search traffic or just general traffic to a publisher website so substantially that their business model could be at risk, you would need to probably get a lot of money in return in order to make up for that. For the fact that people might not even be coming to your website very much anymore. And it's a nascent field, so I don't know how you accurately value your own content.
I mean, there are ways that content is being valued at the moment. Whether that's correct or not, I don't know. But, there's already a precedent set around how you license with platforms. I mean, Apple News, they split revenue 50-50 with publishers. So, all content won't be the same. It's really about that deep and narrow content that actually isn't necessarily available elsewhere. That's the stuff that's going to be valued higher. But each publisher will... but licensing is already happening directly. It's I suppose it's creating the environment where this becomes absolutely necessary.
What other audience development strategies are publishers looking at right now, given a decline in referral traffic, let's say?
Okay, so I think as an industry, we've learned some pretty important lessons over the last few years. And, this is sort of feeding into all of that. Firstly, digital scale at all costs is no longer the answer. Publishers have actively stepped away from a strategy focused on building scale at all costs with the hope that advertising can just monetize it. They really want to have deep, meaningful engagement with their communities. And as a result, the balance of revenues are shifting. The focus has moved to consumer revenues, so things like subscriptions and memberships and those sorts of revenue lines have really been prioritized. Customer direct revenue lines have been elevated. Publishers are really doubling down on growth here. And that doesn't mean that advertising isn't important. It absolutely is. It just means that the heightened focus on our customers, our consumers, that will improve those advertising conversations as well. So we're creating more quality interactions, and that will mean more meaningful connections with the partners.
So bringing audiences into the brand as opposed to coming in, asking a query on Google and accessing a brand that way. Actually building an affinity for the brand. So someone comes to the homepage and then maybe subscribes.
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely a sort of diversification of revenues that's happening. And the importance of that first party relationship has never been more important. And, I know we've talked about digital quite a bit, but I suppose there's no real benefit in this continued push between print versus digital versus social. There's no winner. And actually, it was never our decision to make, right? Publishers are considering all formats strategically based on the purpose of connecting with that consumer. So, the brands that exist across our membership, they meet consumers wherever they are. They exist on multiple media platforms and have, that it's about what's going to have the greatest impact on that audience from an advertising perspective.
We've talked a little bit about digital. I just want to reference some of the ABC figures that came out. Was it only last month? Oh my gosh. It's flying. The year's flying by already. I can't believe we're already at the end of March. So a number of titles grew digital subscribers substantially last year. Overall digital subscriptions, I believe, grew 20%. I'm curious, how would you characterize where magazines are in this sort of digital multimedia transition? Basically, the transition away from relying on print. Obviously, some of these magazines are still producing print and still have substantial subscribers, even if those numbers are in decline. Where are we at the moment?
I think we need to remember that all of our publishers are multi-platform. And the ABC gives one view of this, right? What we touched on this earlier, but these brands are united by communities with shared passions, whether it's their personal passion or whether it's a professional interest. And this is quite central to people's life, right? Their love for all things history might be through media's History Extra podcast, for example, or they might love golf and feel like they want to engage with the brand Bunkered, or it might be that they've got a real focus on sustainability and were inspired by, Good Housekeeping's eco-editorial content. The unique advantage to all of this is that we meet consumers wherever they are. But to the point earlier, publishers are actually responding to audience demand with new print publications as well. So
is print in vogue?
Oh, wow. We'll get to that in a minute. But Bauer recently launched Grazia Beauty, right? And that was a result of a direct response to readers really being obsessed with that beauty space. I don't know whether you've seen, Gale's, the high-end bakery.
Yes.
They've also produced their own magazine companion, right? It talks about baking, the realities of growing and making food in the 21st century. But the bit for me that's quite interesting is memberships. And I think, that has been a really interesting growth area because membership models allow publishers to build that direct lasting relationship with their audiences. They get content, they get perks, they get invited to, special events, and there's a real sense of community there. So membership isn't just about subscribing, it's that joy of being part of something much bigger. I'll give you some examples, but BBC Gardener's World, they don't just offer tips and content. What they do is they connect gardeners at exclusive events. They offer them deals and resources tailored to that passion. Hearst did particularly well. I think their digital subscriptions grew a whopping 25% as they developed multi-platform membership propositions. They've got the L Collective, Good Housekeeping VIP, Men's Health Squad. They all cater to their respective audiences. And they provide opportunities for advertisers to talk directly to these very, very engaged groups.
And these engaged groups are not necessarily just engaging in one format. So that you can go to an event. You can also read the digital paper whenever you want. Maybe some of these people are also still subscribing to the print edition. So there's multiple touch points, I guess, that magazines are going after.
Yeah.
I asked if print is in vogue. When you look at the ABC picture of things, you do generally see, and you have been seeing for many years now, declining subscription numbers for print. That's not to say that there's no one that's reading print anymore. And there are certain print titles that still do quite well. Private Eye has basically been flat for a number of years now, which doesn't, when I say flat, doesn't sound great, but that's actually really impressive. Is there still demand, or do you see any renewed demand for print titles? I'm thinking, is it becoming the new vinyl collection, is having a magazine stack in some young person's workplace?
Yeah, look, is print coming back on vogue? No, I don't think it's coming back because it didn't go away. You've touched on a few. I don't think it's gone away. Print titles, what they do is they offer the opposite of what is white noise, fake news, scrolling, poorly placed, sometimes very irritating adverts. And the editorial curation that comes with a printed product really develops that trust to another level. I came across, the Unilever mention about it investing 50% of their budgets in social, right? What we need to remember is that social also comes with a number of brand safety concerns, and what our brands are able to offer is a really safe way of doing partnerships. And print might be one of those solutions, but actually, publishers have really rich first-party data about their audiences, and it allows for the strongest of partnerships. So an advertiser could choose to work with a trusted editorial brand, and, they don't need to choose that actually we're going to spend X amount on social and X amount on websites and this much on print. Actually, if they choose the brand and they work that partnership, the brand can advise where that money is going to be best spent, and they can be on social as well, right? But it means that they can sort of develop that relationship across multi-platforms, but within the safe environment of that trusted brand.
Surely there's a reach concern that, when I talk to people at agencies that try and defend sort of, well, we need to have a large social budget, let's say like Unilever's going after.
Yeah.
A lot of it is just a pure reach play. They know that there's a large audience on social platforms.
Yeah.
And while, yes, it would be great to work with individual publishers, and maybe that's part of that other 50% media plan, the numbers, the scale isn't exactly there for whatever KPIs that they're, for whatever reason, deciding they want to reach.
Yeah.
So is there a way for publishers to collaborate better? Or, how do they address the scale issue? Because even some of the biggest magazine brands, which have, millions of monthly users, are still paling in comparison to some of these massive platforms.
Scale is that false economy argument, right? So how much of that scale is actually turning into a return on investment? And what magazine brands, trusted editorial brands, are really good at doing is sort of moving people from that browse to buy. And that's actually what marketers should really be focusing on, is that effectiveness. And, our brands have always been very, very strong in that area.
What more do you think magazine brands should be doing to get its share of the ad spend pie to be bigger in let's say, the next 5 years?
As a collective, I think we need to be telling more of a collective story around this. As a collective, we have got a huge amount of scale. And I think, there's a lot of myths around, you think about magazines. The word magazines is also floated about a lot. And when you think about magazine, very often you will think about a printed product that you pick up off a newsstand. And that is such a small part of, the whole magazine world, if you like. So I think there is quite a bit of, reminding people about the variety of opportunities that are available, and where, look out for the new messaging around that as well.
Okay. Well, something to watch in the near future then. Sajeeda, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you very much. It was great to speak to you.
Thank you for listening to the Media Leader Podcast. Our executive producer is me, Jack Benjamin. Special thanks to our production partner, Trisonic. You can find all our episodes wherever you get your podcasts or on our website at themedialeader.co.uk. But do please remember to subscribe to be notified when we release our next episode. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at The Media Leader to receive daily coverage of all the biggest stories in media and advertising. From all of us at The Media Leader, I'm Jack Benjamin. See you next time.